Hello and welcome to Week 12. This is the first lecture, and it's entitled Becoming American Literature and Transcendentalism. I'm going to start off by talking a little bit about becoming an American literature. We're backtracking a little bit, going back to discussing some figures who are important in defining what is to become an American literature, and they are really concurrent figures to the authors we just read, Edgar Allan Poe, Herman Melville, and Nathaniel Hawthorne, and those figures are Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau. Ralph Waldo Emerson is really the figure who stands the tallest in this period of time. He is really the great man of American letters during this period because he acts as really the patron and the father figure of the largest group of writers in this era, the Concord group. Out of that group comes, of course, Henry David Thoreau, but also comes Nathaniel Hawthorne and Margaret Fuller. Tangentially related to that group is Herman Melville, as well as people like Louisa May Alcott, later Harriet Beecher Stowe. I mean, a lot of the major writers of this era are somehow related to Ralph Waldo Emerson. Fact of the matter is that prior to this particular era, most Americans are not aware of American writing, that American writers are not the most popular writers in America. It's still British writers, European writers who are the most popular. The British literary tradition is the American tradition. This begins to change when some American writers become popular in Britain and in Europe. And we read Washington Irving and James Fenimore Cooper, who were quite popular in Britain. The British critic Sidney Smith threw down the gauntlet with the famous quote, "Who reads an American book?" in 1820, which really was a rallying cry for American authors to focus on newness and originality and pursuing an American literature. And that really is, in a lot of ways, the shot heard around the world for American literature. When we look back now, there's a tendency to praise those who are more influential, who write in a style that is more akin to our modern style. And those would be people like Poe and Hawthorne and Melville, writers like Emerson and Thoreau, as opposed to the authors who were more popular at the time, such as Irving and Cooper, Longfellow and Whittier. All this literary activity was centered around the Northeast and the New England area and the Boston area and the Concord area. It's very much still a New England movement, despite Poe coming from the South. I mean, he wrote mainly in Baltimore, Boston, and New York, so it is very much a New England movement still. And these authors wrote for a lot of the same magazines, same literary magazines, The Atlantic. Later I'll talk about The Dial, which was the Transcendentalist magazine. They belonged to the same groups, the Saturday Club, the Transcendentalist Club. They were, most of them, part of the same social class, the upper middle class. And they were still almost all white men. There were some women writers involved in the movement, Margaret Fuller, Louisa May Alcott. I've included as an extra credit assignment a link to Transcendental Wild Oats, which was a spoof, an unfinished spoof, written by Louisa May Alcott about her father's commune, Brook Farm, which was a disaster. Nathaniel Hawthorne was somewhat involved in that as well. It's a funny little short piece, and there's an extra credit assignment involved with that. Getting into Transcendentalism specifically, it's considered to be the first American homegrown literary philosophical movement to gain wide recognition. It's a romantic, idealistic, mystical, individualistic philosophy. And it can be tied specifically to Ralph Waldo Emerson and the Concord group. It flourished in Concord, Massachusetts from 1830 to 1860, tied specifically to Emerson, to Margaret Fuller, to Henry David Thoreau. It's a search for reality through spiritual intuition and sense experience, influenced by German philosophers, British philosophers, the English Romantics, Plato, Platonism, Neoplatonism, Confucianism, so a lot of Eastern philosophies, and the Unitarian Church. Emerson was originally a Unitarian minister. And he leaves the church because he doesn't believe he can deliver the sacrament anymore after the death of his wife. And he goes on sort of a spiritual journey and sort of develops this philosophy, which he really lays out in the essay I have you guys read, which is Nature. Why is it called Transcendentalism? It's because Emerson believes that there is something in the nature of human beings that transcends human experience, that moves beyond the physical. There's a belief that there is an intuitive personal revelation that goes beyond what we can experience with our physical selves, but is also tied to our physical selves. And he talks about in Nature about nature being a duality. There's nature in the natural self, but nature in our character. So our nature, right, and also nature. Idealism versus materialism, that there is a material use for nature, but there's also an ideal use for nature. And he talks about that in terms of commodity, the material use of nature, and also beauty and idealism and language and those sorts of ideal uses for nature. Thoreau puts it very poetically, and a lot of these Transcendentalist writers wrote both poetry and prose, but Thoreau puts it very poetically in, I hear beyond the range of sound, I see beyond the range of sight. And that's, a very clear way of expressing really an abstract idea, which is this concept of an experience beyond nature that is somehow connected to nature. Transcendentalism was a philosophy, not a religion, but you can actually pin down actual transcendentalist beliefs in a lot of ways, and it does spring out of some religious philosophies. So what were those transcendentalist beliefs? First is a unity of the world and God, that God is present in nature, nature is a reflection of God. There's a correspondence between the physical world and the human mind, that basically nature is reflective of the human mind, and he goes into that a bit in the essay Nature. Beauty, goodness, and truth originate in this concept of the oversoul, the concept of God, basically this connecting soul that connects everyone together. And these concepts of beauty, goodness, and truth are embodied in nature, that we can see those things in the nature around us. The divinity of the individual, that we are all divine, that God exists in each and every one of us. The ability of human beings to transcend the senses and directly receive higher truths and greater knowledge. And I'll highlight some specific passages from Nature that focus on that. Self-reliance, individualism, disregard of external authority and tradition. Very important aspects of Transcendentalism. Optimism, living close to nature. And that's something that Thoreau attempts to embody. The dignity of manual labor, and the importance of intellectual companionship. And this intellectual companionship did not restrict itself to being between men. It could be between men and women as well. And the Transcendentalist movement included both men and women. Now you are ready for lecture number 2, where we are going to go into more detail and talk about Ralph Waldo Emerson's Nature and Henry David Thoreau's experience being jailed for civil disobedience.